This is Toledo Symphony Lab, a behind-the-scenes look at the world of classical music from WGTE Public Media and your Toledo Symphony. I'm Brad Cresswell. Joining me today are the Toledo Symphony's president and CEO, Zach Vassar, principal second violin and artistic administrator, Merwin Hsu. We also have the TSO's marketing director, Felicia Canny, and a special guest has joined us, a real live musicologist here from Bowling Green State University. That is Effie Papanikolaou. Effie Papanikolaou.
That's
right?
Correct.
I promise I did practice your name before we got started. But welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So you're here to sort of keep us honest, right? Because we're going to talk about a subject that is been talked about, been written about, been thought about by so many different people, and that is this idea of the Schumanns, Robert Schumann and Clara Schumann, and Johannes Brahms, and the relationship between the three of them. I spent years and years in the wilderness of trying to figure out just what went on between these three folks. So I'm hoping that your presence here today, Effie, can help shine some light on this relationship. Before we get started with that, I want to mention that today's episode is inspired by a concert, believe it or not, a Toledo Symphony concert that's happening this weekend, February 22nd and 23rd, 8 o'clock p.m., the Toledo Museum of Art Peristyle. This is music of Robert Schumann. We're going to hear an overture of his, the piano concerto of Clara Schumann, and the Symphony No. 1 of Johannes Brahms. So that's where this idea of these three composers coming together is coming from. This concert also features pianist Sarah Davis Buchner. Is that how you say your name? Buchner?
I think Buchner.
Buchner,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But not Bueller.
Definitely not Bueller.
Yeah, I want to be careful
Bueller.
about that.
Bueller.
So today is my day to learn how to pronounce everybody's name, right? Sarah Davis Buchner is performing on the piano. She's doing the Clara Schumann piano concerto. Leo Quokman is conducting. They've both been here before, well known to Toledo audiences. So it's going to be a great concert. The music is fantastic. I want to talk about the music in a bit. But first, let's get into this whole idea of the love triangle. You want to give us sort of the Reader's Digest version of what went on in the lives of these three composer, performer, musicians. Effie, the ball's in your court.
I'm accepting the charge and the challenge. What I'm not going to say is that this is, wow, okay.
You're not used to having a Greek chorus, do you?
No.
Yeah.
What I'm not going to say is this is not the Katharine Hepburn rendition of the triangle.
Hang on a second. Let me pull up some music for you. This is, it makes it more fun if we have a little background music.
Okay.
There you go.
Do you
Is this
want this
love
to
triangle?
work as melodrama, kind of?
Just go with it. Go with the flow. Whatever you're inspired to do.
I want to go back to Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn, it was Clara Schumann in this triangle?
In this movie, yes.
Yeah.
All I can say...
Which one was Spencer Tracy?
I don't remember.
I think it would be Robert, but not Brahms.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, who was Brahms then?
That'd be Jimmy Stewart.
Really?
Wow. Seriously? No. Okay.
Jimmy Stewart, to reference prior episodes, as a Muppet, right?
I'm at a disadvantage here. I don't have this previous knowledge.
Yeah,
We're making this all up.
I think
Sounds like a
knowledge
great
is
movie, though.
Knowledge is probably a really highfalutin term to talk about what we're talking about.
Let's not set the bar too high, okay?
All
Here
right.
we go.
Okay.
Effie, as you were.
So, in October of 1853, 20-year-old Johannes Brahms knocks on the door of the Schumanns in Düsseldorf, and he introduces himself, and he says, "You're my idol. I love you. I love your music." And
These days, that would be called stalking.
Yes, it would be called stalking.
In seriousness, was he saying that to both Clara and Robert, or just to one of the
At
other?
the time, I think only to Robert.
Okay.
But Clara was around, and they were kind enough to include him in their family, and they let him stay with them for about a month. And for about a month, they kept writing music, playing music, looking at each other's music, and having a lot of fun. And
How old were they?
Well, Clara at that time was in 53. She was, 34?
Okay.
So
Yeah,
Robert
Schumann was older, obviously, and Brahms was sort of on the other end, younger than Clara.
Okay.
Oh, he was young and handsome. If
Yeah.
you have in mind the Brahms with the long beard, that was not the 20-year-old Johannes. He was quite a
Hey.
catch.
Yeah.
He was
I'm looking at a
very,
picture
very
of him here.
handsome. So I don't know if that's of interest to anybody. But within a year, and this is common knowledge, I think, Schumann attempted suicide, and he asked to be institutionalized. And after that, actually, Brahms moved into the household full time and helped Clara out and the kids and took care of the household on a daily basis.
This is where we should make sure we distinguish between correlation and causation.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think Brahms being around caused Robert Schumann to commit suicide.
In the river.
It's just, it was merely kind of around the same time. It happened to be at that time.
Well, Robert Schumann, did a whole lot to advance Brahms's career. I mean, he was, the greatest thing since sliced bread as far as Schumann was
Right, because
concerned.
within 1 month after their first meeting, he wrote the famous review for the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik. And basically he said, he's the eagle of German music, and he's going to save German music.
Wow.
And then he made the mistake of saying, he's
pressure.
the heir to Beethoven or something like that, which caused Brahms not to finish his first symphony for 20 years. But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Willow had something to do with that too.
Yeah. But now, when Robert Schumann, when he was in the asylum, didn't they tell him that Clara could not visit him? And
That's
Brahms
right.
was sort of the go-between.
That's right. He had a doctor who had very interesting techniques and methods for the time for the institutionalized, and he wouldn't let Clara visit. But if you think of the institutions at that time, of the asylums as you call them, those were not pretty places to visit. And especially when we think of what the image I'm sure we'll come back to that, what the image of the female was in the 19th century. She was fragile and she was very sensitive. And oh my gosh, Clara can't see her husband in that condition because she's not going to be able to take it.
Yeah.
So that's why she didn't go, not because she didn't want to. But she would send Brahms.
Huh. That's interesting. Well, you kind of touched on something which I think is going to be a point of contention here, and the idea of talking about Clara Schumann as the muse that, inspired these composers. You have love letters and music between Robert and Clara, and then you have Brahms. If you look at his letters to her, they start getting more and more intimate and full-blown sexy with, I'm waiting for your kiss and all that sort of thing.
But that
I
happens.
think the music needs to come back.
But that happens when Robert is dead.
Right.
Until then, he wouldn't dare say anything like that.
It's not like it was during that month that they were all living together that he was, knocking at the door.
No,
Yeah.
he was very respectful.
But if they made the movie now, that's how it would happen. Right?
We made the movie now.
It would be Robert would jump into the Rhine River because of Brahms.
Right,
and
right.
all of that. Yeah, we could take literary
let's do
license.
that.
I mean, they're all dead. They're not going to complain at this point, right?
Sure.
Or you can complain on their behalf.
So, but there was, so we have to remember that Clara Schumann was a significant composer herself, and that there was a great reputation here that Brahms would look to her after Robert died for some amount of validation of his writing and his career. And even to the point where I think he started writing what we now know as the first piano concerto as a symphony, but she didn't care much for it, right?
Well, they had a very contentious exchange of letters about that. But Brahms always respected her musical opinion, always. And whenever he had a new piece that he wanted to try out, he would send her some information or the score and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And Clara was an incredible musician. Some might say she was a better musician and would have been a better composer than Robert Schumann. But that was not meant to be.
Can we talk just a moment about what a fantastic musician she was and the remarkable career she had? And she commanded the respect of all the great composers of the time. I mean, she was friends with all the great composers of the time. And as a pianist, I mean, she was an amazing pianist. She wrote this piano concerto when she was still a teenager, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And technically, she wrote it when she was still Clara Wieck. Because her father, who was a very famous piano pedagogue, urged her, of course, to compose, because at the time it was not enough to just be a virtuoso performer. When you went to perform, you had to play some of your own music too. And he was adamant that she learn how to compose and compose very well.
Wow.
But so she's not just sitting in a wood-paneled room playing some of her own piano music, short romantic work. She was writing for orchestras. She was writing for a piano concerto for performance on the stage, which I have to imagine would have been unexpected.
Completely unexpected. You are absolutely right, Zach. But at that time, she was also kind of starting the relationship with Robert Schumann, who was hanging around in the household. And there is also some information, and this is my musicological nerdy background. I apologize. It will take about 1 minute, and then we'll come back to fun. That actually, when she wrote the piano concerto, she started with the third movement. And initially, it was an independent composition. And Robert Schumann volunteered to write the orchestral parts for her. Wow. And she was more than happy to oblige. So it was not one of these, oh my gosh, the male oppressor is telling the female that you can't orchestrate this piece and I have to do it for you. It was nothing like that. It was that they were collaborating. And Clara said, absolutely, yes, do this. So we have some sketches where Robert has orchestrated this movement. We don't know about the first and the second, or what became later the first or the second. So that's my musicological
So that's how he hit on her?
Yeah.
That's a great pickup line. Hey, baby, can I orchestrate your movement?
Wow. But in all seriousness, were they an item? Were they colleagues at this point, or were Robert and Clara were they engaged? They weren't married.
They were not engaged. You're right. But Robert Schumann was Wieck's also piano student. Yes.
Wow.
So he was around in the house. That's perfect. Thank you, Brad.
Actually, it is perfect because he was nowhere near as amazing a pianist as Clara. And so, I think that's one of the things that it actually may have inadvertently doomed his own career because, when you are attempting to have that sort of career and you are watching somebody, a decade your junior just lap you in circles, it's probably, I think that was certainly something that was, difficult for him. And he did struggle with having to watch the fact that there was somebody who is significantly more talented as a pianist. And, he certainly went to many great lengths to try to advance his own pianistic ability, but it never really quite panned out.
Including hurting his finger.
Yes, I was hoping that you would do that because it was like, he created
it was a contraption.
Some sort of weird
exercise.
Was it to like for the pianists to spread the fingers apart and
exercise
train
Wait, hang on.
Let's
stop for a second. So, what?
So Robert Schumann created a contraption that was, I think, intended to exercise the ring finger and make it more powerful because
this is for piano playing, right?
For piano playing, and it may or may not have been one of the things that drove him mad.
Did he have like an abnormally large ring finger then, or how did that work?
I think what it was it temporarily kind of like held other fingers down, so you were forced to work
to strengthen
with your weaker
those fingers.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all right.
And that's what drove him mad?
It would drive anyone mad, probably.
Oh, Zach, you're giving this.
That's actually really funny because I was going to remark that earlier you had said something, Effie, of historical import, which is in the entire, 50-some episodes of the show, we had never heard the words. You're absolutely right, Zach.
I was going to mention something about that, but I refrained.
Now it all just came back.
This is the double-edged sword of inviting somebody who actually knows what they're talking about onto the show. Not that you don't know what you're talking about. I was thinking more about
These
me,
are the best
Zach.
friends I have.
I have to be nice to my hosts for the first time I'm here, so that I may be invited back.
Right.
Yeah, we have a lot of one-time guests on this show. Effie.
You know what?
Well,
I have.
Now,
Okay, you can say your piece.
So, it may not have led to his demise, but I think it's a very strange undertaking for somebody to try to strengthen the weak fingers. But this was also during the time of great scientific revolution and exploration and perfection of the mind and body. So it could make sense.
Okay.
Do we really want to talk about why he died?
Well,
and what led?
Well, that's sort of
now that
teaser,
you open that up, I think we have to.
But let's hold on to that, and then I also want to talk about this love triangle thing, because I never could figure out in my years of being peripherally involved with classical music did they or didn't they, right? So we'll talk about that. But let's save it. I want to do a little quiz first.
You're really trying to get people to listen through the whole half hour.
Right.
I have some information for that. I'm ready.
Okay. Well, hang on to it.
Listeners, don't go anywhere.
We're going to do a little quiz.
Stay tuned to FM 91.
We're going to do what I call a literary love triangles quiz, right? I'm going to give you
Pop quizzes.
the year that this book was written. I'll give you the year the book was written. I won't give you the author or the title. You have to come up with what book it is. You get extra credit if you can name the love triangle.
So you just give us a date and we have to come up with a triangle?
I'm going to give you quotes. I got 3 different quotes. One after the other, right? So let's pull up a little Love Shack music.
Everyone's like, I'm ready.
I'm so not ready. I feel very stressed out.
Is this supposed to be the B-52s or
Something
Esquivel?
like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Get in the mood.
Yes, these chairs don't dance the way they should.
All right, here's the first one. This is from a novel written in 1973. The first quote is this: "Life isn't fair, it's just fairer than death, that's all." Any idea?
No.
Okay, quote B: "If your love were a grain of sand, mine would be a universe of beaches."
It's a great line.
This is a novel that was made into a movie. And the movie doesn't, I don't know that it has these particular quotes. The last quote actually does come, the last quote does come from the book and the movie. Inconceivable.
The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was based on a book.
That was a book published in 1973 by William Goldman. Here's the second one. This was written in 1813. The first quote is, "A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony in a moment."
Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice.
Very good.
Wow.
Okay, next one.
I missed Inconceivable. that
was inconceivable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I should have had that.
Next one. A novel written in 1936. "I can't think about that right now. If I do, I'll go crazy. I'll think about that tomorrow."
Wow, that's like my life print.
I know. I was just thinking that's what I do every day.
Okay. Second quote. "Death, taxes, and childbirth. There's never any convenient time for any of them."
This is 1936?
1936. Third and final quote. "My dear, I don't give a damn."
Gone with the Wind?
Yeah.
Gone with the Wind. It was
There
Clark
was
Gable
not
that
much
said,
time
frankly,
between
yeah.
the book and the movie then.
No, not at all.
I didn't know
And
that.
that was her only novel,
Wow.
and it was a big one. Okay, that goes to Zach. Here's the next one. This is from a play written in 1897. "A kiss is a secret which takes the lips for the ear."
Wow.
Great quote, huh?
That is a great
I wish I had that on Valentine's Day.
Here's the next one. "All our souls are written in our eyes." And the third one, which should provide a good clue. "A great nose may be an index of a great soul."
That'd be Pinocchio.
Close. What other literary character can you think of that has a great nose?
Jimmy Durante.
Oh.
This is Cyrano?
Cyrano.
Cyrano.
Yeah.
Cyrano de Bergerac. Very good. Boy, Zach, you're cleaning up here.
When are we getting back to the 19th century?
Right now. Here's a novel written in 1847. First quote is, "If he loved with all the powers of his puny being, he couldn't love as much in 80 years as I could in a day." You get that?
Okay.
Here's the next quote. "If you ever looked at me once with what I know is in you, I would be your slave." No? This is a novel by one of the Bronte sisters.
sharp.
Heaven did not seem to be my home, and I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth. And the angels were so angry that they flung me out into the middle of the heath on the top of...
This would be Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering Heights. Yes. I'm going to give that to Merwin. Okay, here's another one. Now we're going to the 18th century, Effie, or if you're okay with that. This was...
I'm trying here.
So all of these have a love triangle.
Yeah, they have a love triangle. I guess I should have mentioned who the love triangle was, but we're not going to go back at this point. Going forward, I can mention the love triangle after the fact. This is a novella written in 1774, a short novel. The first quote is this: "The human race is a monotonous affair. Most people spend the greatest part of their time working in order to live, and what little freedom remains so fills them with fear that they seek out any and every means to be rid of it." That was really complicated to say. Here's the next quote. "What I know, everyone can know. I only have my heart." I'll mention this was a novel written in German originally, and made the author famous.
Okay.
The last quote is in French because this was made into an opera. "Pourquoi me réveiller? The sorrows of young
Werther.
Werther." Yes. You know about this novel, right? This like inspired young men all across Europe to dress up like Werther and to revel in their depression. What do they
and
call it?
And commit suicide.
Werther
not
fever.
A happy end to this.
Werther fever. Unfortunately, a lot of them decided to follow through and kill themselves. So,
really?
Kind of like emo music.
I was
And
thinking that.
you know,
Massenet
10,
still
15
wrote
years.
the opera knowing that?
Yeah, I don't think the opera killed anybody, but the novel definitely.
Maybe a
Not
couple
great-
audience members.
It's a difficult second violin part, so it might have killed a few people.
I actually love the opera.
Yeah.
I do.
What were we going to talk about? Oh, we're talking about Brahms and Schumann.
Wow.
You were going to jump in, Effie, with something before.
We were going to talk about Schumann's death.
Oh, yeah, the death of Schumann.
Le Mort de Schumann. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, you have to understand that I studied with a Schumann scholar by the name of John Daverio, who wrote one of the most definitive biographies on Robert Schumann. And the consensus, I think, still is, although some people don't accept it, that Schumann had secondary syphilis. He suffered from secondary syphilis. Clara was very, very lucky never to get it. And his children didn't get it. So part of the symptoms of secondary syphilis have to do with the degeneration of the brain. And that's essentially what led him to that condition. But he was also very smart. When he realized that he was not doing well, he begged for Clara to send him to the institution because he was afraid something was going to happen and he was going to harm her or her children. Wow. And that's really what happened.
What was the relationship between Robert Schumann and Brahms later in Robert's life?
Well, there wasn't too much later, right? Because they met in 53, 54.
4 months later, he jumped off the bridge. Yeah.
They met that close. I didn't realize that they met that late in his life.
And within 3 years, he was dead. But he would go to the institution because it was outside of Bonn. And Clara would always write to him and say, "How is Robert? Could you please send me a letter and let me know how my Robert is doing?"
Yeah.
So maybe it's not that there was a love triangle to start with. It sounds like later, with some of those letters that Brad alluded to, Brahms probably ended up falling for Clara in a pretty serious way.
Well,
but
certainly.
there was this sense of intimacy, and he was brought into the family in such a meaningful way, and then he was the conduit between husband and wife and communication.
Well, in the sense that Robert Schumann, certainly his spirit hung over that relationship, for their entire lives. So there was a love triangle of sorts there. I mean, you can make it a quadrangle, bring in Beethoven, and all kinds of possibilities open up.
Okay, Brad, that's where I draw the line. Because if we start with Beethoven, we will never end.
But didn't Brahms, didn't he support Clara in her career by taking care of all of her children so she could travel? So it's kind of like like you see someone in need and you can't. He's such a good person that you have to help her. You know,
you're absolutely right. He was such a loyal friend, and he basically held the household together for 3 years, while Clara was going around trying to make money, essentially, because she needed money to raise her family.
Yeah. Wow.
And Brahms was there. And when Robert died, and again, one moment of musicological nerdiness here. When he died,
because we're never nerdy on this podcast, right?
Brahms asked Clara to go on a vacation with him. And they took the Rhine River and they went down all the way to Switzerland. And something happened there. And chances are that Johannes... Wow.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm trying here. Chances are that Johannes declared his love for Clara, and maybe he wanted for something to develop, but they came back and we never really have found out what happened.
That's the place to do it. It's beautiful there.
Great.
Well, that's why we just
this
make
would
it
have
up.
been in how many years after?
Just a year.
Like a year after Robert Schumann's death. All right.
And chances are Clara was not going to betray the legacy.
So if
of her
not a
husband.
muse, then would she have been the unrequited love?
It could have been for Brahms. I don't think Clara was in love with him in the sense that he wanted to be with him. But she cherished him as a dear friend all her life. And of course, Brahms died only a year after Clara. And that her death was such a huge blow to him. And probably precipitated his death.
But he didn't only have eyes just specifically for Clara, because there were other women in his life.
But I think it's worth noting how those relationships never really developed. And in fact, we probably know the relationships more for the musical codes they engendered than for actually anything that happened in the relationships themselves.
Yeah,
So
there was the woman that he was going to propose to, and she basically dumped him. And,
Agatha von Seibelt,
yeah. Interesting. A lot of interesting stuff there. But what we all want to know is what happened behind those closed doors, right?
In Switzerland?
Yeah.
What happened in Switzerland seems like a great
so
title.
is that like the crux of this whole thing that people they don't know? I mean, did they or didn't they? And we'll never know.
We'll never know, but I don't think it's that important. Really, at the end of the day.
No, it is important. We want to know.
Okay.
This is not the National Enquirer, Brad. So let's go to some more musical nerdiness. I'm interested that both... so Robert Schumann and Clara Schumann both have a piano concerto in the same key. So if Clara wrote hers first, right, and Robert helped orchestrate parts of it, did that in any way influence how he approached his piano concerto later?
Second time I'm going to say, great question, Zach. Fantastic.
I want to make sure everybody heard that.
You get an A.
Her expressions every time I hit the soundboard are the best thing. Unfortunately, people can't see it, but we can hear our reactions.
We can post the picture.
Yeah.
Besides sharing the same key, what we know, since we're all here, what we know of Clara's piano concerto is that it's essentially in one movement. It has three distinct sections, but there is no pause after the first movement. It just moves seamlessly into the second movement and the second slow movement into the third movement. So this kind of organicism that we call in music of the 19th century was at the center of Robert Schumann's investigation as a composer. And he ended up doing it in so many other of his compositions. Maybe not so much in the piano concerto that he wrote, but certainly in his symphonies. And he did it in the Fantasy, which is a very famous composition that has this kind of free flow. That's why we say also Clara's piano concerto is fantasy-like, because it doesn't adhere to the principles of traditional piano concerto.
Doesn't the second movement go right into the third in his piano concerto, though? It is a tocca, isn't it?
It is a tocca, yes, but not the first.
Right.
But not the first.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he... actually, John DeVerio, in his book, insightfully has said that probably at the back of his head, he had Clara's music and this kind of fusion of the music into one mega romance-like, fantasy-like composition, which, of course, permeates a lot of his own output, was already there because he was influenced by Clara and her early music.
In a way, doesn't that feed a little bit into the idea of her being his muse and her being Brahms's muse? I mean, to play devil's advocate here, what position does that put Clara in, and what are your thoughts about that, Effie?
I think of muse, I'm Greek, right? When I think of muse, I think of muses, and the muses are there to inspire, right? And in that sense, absolutely, I understand, and we all understand here, that she was an inspiration for Robert Schumann, and maybe partly for Johannes Brahms as well. But on a daily basis, what these composers did was not really necessary because of what Clara did, or because of her presence.
No.
But this influence was there, certainly. And maybe you can tell me why you called the program the Clara Schumann the Muse. Now I'm putting you on the spot.
That's to you, Merwin.
Well, I think that it is absolutely to explore this relationship because it is one of the most interesting relationships in all of music. And I think that when you're looking with Brahms in particular, it is a little bit, we are skirting it a little bit because I do think, in a way, more of his music was inspired by Agatha von Ziebold than Clara Schumann. But so much of his music would never have actually come to be without Clara. And I don't mean that in the he would never have thought of it or written it down, but he would never have preserved it. It would never have taken the final form that it did without Clara Schumann. Something like the piano quintet, which went through like 9 billion different types of, I'm exaggerating, but many different versions before, and always with Clara Schumann's input.
Yeah, she edited everything.
Yeah, right? Exactly. This seems a little too symphonic. No, this can't just be a piano trio. You need to take these ideas, make it into a piano quintet. So Brahms was so ruthless with his own compositions. He would destroy so many of them. And in a way, the compositions would only stay in his, actually get to the published form with Clara Schumann's guidance and encouragement. So in that sense, I think it's actually a very fair comment. And I think when you're talking about Brahms's first symphony, so many different versions and so many failed symphonies before that. And this is the one that came to be. And
can we talk about the first symphony, please?
Yeah,
sure.
Definitely. We don't have a lot of time left.
Pretty
but
good. It's a pretty good symphony.
Yes.
The best first
I've heard
symphony
it.
ever written.
It's actually the 10th symphony. That's what Hans von Bülow
Of
said.
Brahms or Beethoven?
Oh, no. He said that of Brahms' first symphony. And of course, when in the 19th century you say the 10th, it means Beethoven's 10th.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it would have been Beethoven's 10th if he had composed.
And there is an allusion to Beethoven's 9th in Brahms's first.
Yes. There is a tune that comes about 6 minutes into the fourth movement that has been misquoted sometimes as a quotation of Beethoven's 9th Ode to Joy theme. It's not an exact quotation, but it's really, it alludes to the tune from Beethoven's 9th Symphony.
This reminds me somehow of that Who's on First routine, like who's on first? Beethoven? Second? No, I don't know. Nobody gets it. Okay. Go ahead. This is why you're a musicologist and I'm not.
Am I allowed to swear? I don't know what I can say here on
It will
the
be
radio.
bleeped, so
But it will be a quotation. I'm not swearing. It's going to be Brahms swearing.
Oh, I thought you meant just as a pejorative. Like
She's not trying to swear at you.
just because you were mad at me,
No.
Okay.
No. I'm quoting, I'm channeling Brahms here.
We can beep it out.
After the premiere of the First Symphony in 1876, of course, all the audiences heard that allusion to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And they were very eager to point it out to him. Oh my gosh, Johannes, in the fourth movement, you have a tune that sounds very much like the Ode to Joy. Brahms was kind of an acerbic guy. He knew exactly what he had done. He didn't expect anybody to really school him on the fact that he had a tune there that sounded like Beethoven's music. and he said something in German that would translate as, yes, every jackass can say that.
You can say jackass on the radio. That's fine. And on a podcast. So
Good.
We're good with that.
So,
I mean, I hear it on an almost daily basis, so it's fine.
are you trying to incorporate Beethoven's Ninth Symphony into your life too?
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody needs more Beethoven and Brahms.
So, 1873?
Six.
So how long after meeting Clara and Robert was that? That was 23 years?
That was 23 years.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if we had to think about it, fits and starts, he tried to write a symphony. It became something else many times. Other times it would go into the wastebasket. I mean, was this something that he wanted to do and kept distracting himself with, or was it something that he felt the burden of Beethoven and possibly Robert Schumann over his shoulder and he was running away from it?
Well, Merwin is shaking his head, so I think we both know here.
I think what you just said is very appropriate, and I think when you look at the forms that Beethoven was associated with, things like the string quartet or the symphony, you see there's a real anxiety of influence in there, and I think
Very nice, Merwin.
Oh,
Yeah.
You're getting an A too.
yeah.
Yeah, we're
It's
all
funny.
going to
Usually
get
my
graded
A's
at the
come
end.
after the but when you listen to Brahms's first string quartet, it doesn't have the same freedom that, say, his string sextets do, which are just so incredibly, wonderfully unrestrained. And the Beethoven first, like the Beethoven movements, all these C minor things, like the first symphony of Brahms is in C minor and the first string quartet also in C minor. I think those are very consciously Beethovenian keys. And I think Brahms is very much aware that he's writing his string quartet after Beethoven, and he's writing his first symphony after Beethoven, and he knows he has to wrestle with that. And the symphony is, I think, much more successful than his first string quartet.
But why is it that we have to say it's on Brahms's shoulders to do this? Because, I mean, Schumann composed after Beethoven, and nobody accused him of trying to be the next
Schumann
Beethoven.
put that mantle on Brahms. Schumann did it. Schumann actually did it.
So it's his fault.
Yeah. So once again, it's all Robert's fault.
So going back to the Brahms and Clara relationship, one of the characteristics I love about Brahms' symphonies and his chamber music as well is the way it's edited. Now I know it's Clara who is his editor. He had, I think by the end of his fourth symphony, his last symphony, no extra notes. I mean, there was great efficiency in his writing, but also great drama. So is that a characteristic that Brahms would have insisted upon, and that's why he didn't write his first symphony until so long after he tried to start writing it?
But the next three symphonies came fairly
quickly, right? So it opens the floodgates. Or is it something that Clara would have insisted that he master before he proceed with it?
Musicological nerdiness number 3.
I love how we're keeping track.
You're right that Robert put that mantle on him to write symphonies and write not only symphonies but also choral music, which he did magnificently. We also have to think of the other composers who write symphonies in the 19th century and the politics of music in the 19th century. Brahms is the lone voice of what we call absolute music, music that has no external connections. And then we have all these other composers who write symphonies, but they are programmatic. They have extra musical associations, Berlioz, Liszt, and of course we have Wagner in the realm of opera, and they are a very powerful voice. And the only one who really can hold his own and write absolute music the way Beethoven did is Brahms. But I also want to note one more connection here, and it's a little show and tell that unfortunately our listeners are not going to see. It's a card that Brahms wrote to Clara from his summer spa in Switzerland in September of 1868. So he didn't write a letter. He just sent her this card that has a musical quotation. And under the musical quotation, or first of all, above the musical quotation, he says, "Thus blew the Alp horn today." He was in Switzerland, right?
Is
and
that
then
an euphemism? Or?
Appropriate.
Oh, pray.
And then under the music, he writes, "High from the mountain, deep in the valley, I greet you 1,000 times." And then you sing this tune, and it is the famous Alp horn tune from the fourth movement of his first symphony. Da-da-dum-bum, da-da-dum. So we know that he had this tune in his mind in 1868.
Oh, my.
So
5 years
this
before.
is a Clara connection also that works into the symphony.
Yeah.
And then the final product in 1876.
Wow.
So it
But-
was. So
But
it
this
was
kind of like this whole postcard sort of goes back to those closed doors in Switzerland. You know, it has that kind of a cryptic sense to it. Would you agree with that?
It is cryptic because only Clara would have known of that connection. And now we, musicologists,
Now
because
everybody
we're
who listens to
gossiping.
the podcast, we're telling everybody. They all know now.
This is breaking news.
The world knows now.
Breaking news from 1868.
So this is
Well,
not
you know.
like a dissertation that someone is writing and they take years and years and years to complete. It's actual pressure probably on Brahms's part to live up to the expectations that people have of that type of composer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But we don't want to paint a portrait of Brahms as being like, you know, this poor composer under pressure all of his life. I mean, he was a man of tremendous humor. He was also a man who was very interested in research and scholarship and uncovering and learning about the music of the past. You know, somebody who was really, apart from his relationship with the Schumanns, was just a tremendous personality in the world of music.
He was, but Beethoven haunted him, and that's what he would tell people.
Ooh.
And
Yeah,
when I
Beethoven
teach,
is just right here, sitting on my shoulder, guys.
it's absolutely correct. When I teach Brahms, there is a famous picture of his study in Vienna, and right behind his piano, where he would sit down to compose, there is a bust of Beethoven. So
great.
literally, he would haunt him. Every time he would sit at the piano, Beethoven was right behind him.
Wow.
But it's like you look at all of the different ways that Brahms avoided the symphony until he was ready. These gorgeous serenades, beautiful serenades that somehow are not.
Procrastinating. He's
they're-
procrastinating, right?
but- Well, he's not. He's finding these incredible. He's creating these works which don't have that influence behind them.
This is his Das Lied.
Yeah. Just a way to avoid being directly compared. And you see how free and beautiful and just there's this, you know, there is something about like the younger Brahms works that don't have that pressure that are just wonderful and so opening and freeing, and it's just a very different Brahms than the symphonic Brahms or the string quartet Brahms.
Yeah. Should we all be so talented at
Absolutely.
procrastination, right?
Absolutely, right.
But didn't he even, where was the symphony premiered? Didn't he not want to premiere it in Vienna?
It didn't premiere in Vienna. It premiered in Karlsruhe.
Yeah, okay.
And a couple of months later, it moved to Vienna.
So
it
he
premiered
did
in
a
Vienna.
little tryout in the suburbs before
Smart.
And he used to do that all
Test
the
marketing.
time. Also, I'm sorry to throw
Is this
in
number-
Wagner again. I
Well-
And you
can't.
should be.
I can't do anything without mentioning Wagner. Do you remember in the summer of 1876?
he...
I wasn't
was
there.
there.
No.
The Ring Cycle premiered at Bayreuth.
Thank you very much, Brad,
Yeah.
for your serious answer to
It
this
was
serious
also
question.
the centenary of our United States of America, if you remember. The Statue of Liberty came over from France. Yeah. And Wagner wrote a centennial overture for the city of Philadelphia. Somewhere around that time, yeah.
Lots of very important things happened, and the musical world was already reeling from the Ring in Bayreuth in 1876 when Brahms premiered his
Brahms
symphony.
was like, I can slip this symphony in, nobody will notice.
That's amazing.
Thank you, Wagner.
So, the first symphony, was it positively reviewed? Was it received well?
by everybody, even his detractors. And Edward Hanslick, who was the biggest opponent of program music, held Brahms's music and Brahms himself at a pedestal. And he had put him on the pedestal. And he
How
wrote...
did he feel about Wagner?
Oh,
That's
no.
a podcast for another day.
Positive thoughts.
But is that typical? So as we're thinking about this, First Symphony, later in life, a very mature composer writing his First Symphony, is it typical for a First Symphony to get the kind of praise that this did?
It depends. That's another interesting question, Zach. It depends. The world was anticipating Brahms's First Symphony, right? So everybody was waiting to see what it was going to be like. And Brahms was a known entity. He was not an unknown composer. So immediately the connections with Brahms happened. Hanslick wrote in his review of the First Symphony that it was the best symphony that had happened after Beethoven's symphonies. Hans von Bülow, the famous conductor, wrote that Brahms was the continuation of the Beethovenian tradition, and he said the famous, there are only 3 B's in German music. First there is Bach, then there is Beethoven, and there is Brahms.
Yeah.
Poor Max Bruch.
Yeah, right.
What about Bruckner?
Yeah, right. So, Effie, if somebody's listening to this right now who's not heard the Brahms First Symphony, what's a word or a characteristic that you think embodies what this symphony will demonstrate for them?
It's difficult to encapsulate that in one word.
Hang on.
This doesn't help,
That
Brad.
does not help. Okay. Bad Brad.
That's 2 more B's.
Trying to get them all in there.
This is a symphony. Brahms is a composer's composer. And you need to look at his music as well to understand how beautifully crafted it is. So the audience are going to hear lush harmonies and beautiful tone colors and great timbres and textures. Not so many melodies until you get to the 4th movement, essentially. But the musical writing is so dense and so beautiful and so well thought through. And then when you look at the score, that's when you really appreciate Brahms. That's why I always ask my students, if you really want to know Brahms, you have to study his scores. If you don't study his scores, you're just getting a glimpse into his music. And I understand that our audiences won't have the opportunity to do that, but listen for the beautiful sound. And I don't use the word beautiful haphazardly. It's a great romantic sound.
Well, we're going to have to stop right there. My thanks to Zach Vassar, Merwin Sue, and Felicia Canny, and of course to our special guest, Effie Papanikolaou. How was it for you, Effie?
It was wonderful.
Yeah?
I loved it.
Yeah? You would come back?
I would come back in a heartbeat.
Glad to hear it. This program is a production of WGTE Public Media in collaboration with our sponsor, the Toledo Symphony. You can find us as a podcast. That's at our website, wgte.org/lab. I'm Brad Cresswell, and you've been listening to Toledo Symphony Lab here on FM 91.